Hello and welcome back to the Rob and Zander Show. My guest today is Andrew Bartlow. He is the author of Scaling for Success, People Priorities for High Growth Organizations. He is also the founder and director of People Leader Accelerator, which is an MBA for HR professionals is one way to say it, of which I've been able to be a little bit of a role at Zander Media. We've helped with some design and some implementation. Andrew has a long and storied career, which we'll talk about in HR across big and small organizations, and is just a wealth of knowledge. There are a lot of people who I look up to who look up to Andrew for his low-key demeanor, high integrity, quality of expertise in all things the modern face of HR. Andrew, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today. I'm been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. We know each other, of course, professionally, and we'll dive into that. But there's so many conversations personally that we just have never taken the time to have for as many years now as we've known each other and worked together. So yeah, thank you. You have expertise in a lot of domains that I feel like I and other CEOs and chief people officers are striving to catch up to. That things that you can do in your sleep just so quickly because you've got so many years of experience in HR and in the aspects of building culture and building organizations. So I'm excited to dig in.
Well, thank you. You embarrassed me a little bit with the compliments, and you always look forward to our conversations. So I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah. It's been fun because in the time that I've known you, you've become like a real entrepreneur running a business, and you've had businesses before. We'll talk about Series B and obviously People Leader Accelerator. But your history, as I understand it, is primarily working as an employee in organizations in an HR capacity. And the place that I want to start is, what did you want to be when you grew up? And tell me a little bit about your aspirations as a kid.
Oh my goodness, what a scary first question to send my way. All right, I'll give you the real answer. What did I really want to be when I grew up? I wanted to be Alex P. Keaton, the character out of Family Ties, who was smart and sharp and successful and made things happen. And boy, I looked up to that character in a lot of ways. And I think there's some backstory there. Being part of a family that was going through their own financial crisis, a business that my grandfather started that ended up failing while I was in high school that employed my family members. And so I've had this entrepreneurial streak as well as this real strive and drive for security and success at the same time.
What was that family business?
It was a trucking company.
Okay.
My grandfather was a mechanic in St. Louis, and he worked on yellow taxis. He went away to the war, and he became a tank mechanic. Okay. And then he came back after the war, and he and his brother started a over-the-road, big rig trucking business. And he drove them long haul, and he worked on them. And eventually that turned into a decent-sized employer where they had 100 trucks and 200 drivers, and then it wasn't anymore.
Yeah. How did that go out of business? What was that story, and what was that like for you in high school?
Yeah. Well, longer and larger economic story where if you have empty runs where you take something in your truck from one place to another, it's really helpful to come back with something in it. And so in the early 90s, which is the time frame that I'm talking about, times were tough. Actually, I think I've heard recently that the Fed raised interest rates 0.75 of a point back in 1994. So there's some economic calamity going on at the time that I'm not even currently aware of.
Got it.
So that business took a downturn, and that was really challenging for the family and relationships, and I think that had a formative effect on my aspirations and career choices.
Super interesting. I also grew up in a small family business. My dad and his sister built a 30-person environmental consulting firm, and that was sort of business as I knew it growing up. And, in middle school, I would get paid to I don't know, clean the file room in their old office in Novato,
Yeah.
California. Where actually did you grow up?
Central Illinois, in among the cornfields.
Interesting.
East Peoria, Illinois.
Okay.
Yeah, which at the time was the headquarters of Caterpillar, and Morton Buildings was in the town right next door.
Yeah.
So some industrial manufacturing and, middle America. So, for transportation and logistics, it made sense.
I like this idea of this combination between entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial upbringing, growing up in a family business, and then also the desire for success and stability. That makes a lot of sense in what I know you to be doing today and your track record in HR specifically. What were some of the darker sides of that family story in high school, right? Where this business that your grandfather founded sounds like dissolved when you were, pretty young.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack. Family strife with that, where my grandfather's two children, my mom and my uncle, ended up being the second generation that were leading the business, and their spouses, my dad and my aunt, were also involved. And when things weren't going well, that was harder for everybody. It was harder for my grandfather, and his brother, who co-founded with him, had passed at that point. He'd handed off this reasonably successful business to the next generation, and now it's not going as well. And he's trying to be retired and mow the yard and pick apples and that sort of thing. Yeah. So lots of interpersonal and family dynamics and challenges that come with that.
And small business strife is one thing. Small business strife when it's among family is is kind of as hard as it can get.
Yeah. Well, and heck, it was never a giant business. It was never, Trump Towers sort of thing. Whatever we all think that actually is. It was small business, and employed a number of family members, and went through bankruptcy, went through personal bankruptcies, and we were clipping coupons, and that's one of the more meaningful memories I have of clipping coupons and thinking, I never want to clip a coupon again. I never want to have to clip a coupon again.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we'll come back to the in-between spot, but then what has it been like, in just the last couple of years that I've known you, you've built and you founded this accelerator, People Leader Accelerator, which, I've had a hand in helping to design a little bit, and Zander Media has built, some websites and some assets of it. But you are now running a business as an entrepreneur, which kind of is full circle. Has some of that early childhood stuff come back? Has that tension, is there anything there for you that relates back to who you were in high school and that challenge that you saw your family go through?
Yes and no. Well, first, don't undersell the support that Zander Media has given to me and People Leader Accelerator. I've appreciated you and your team's involvement since pre-day one, day minus 100. So thank you for the help along the way. Connections into what I'm doing now and how this has developed. I have always had an entrepreneurial streak of some sort. I knew I always wanted to do something, start something, be my own boss. But I needed to have that level of security and stability to get there. And so, I pursued a 25-year corporate career to get there, to get to, it's not that I could, hang up and move to Aruba and, buy a mansion and a yacht, but I had enough stability where I felt like I could pay the bills and I could do something a little riskier. So it was a relatively high bar that I needed to establish for myself to get there, though. And so that, freed me to write my book. And then I was thinking about, okay, well, what do I do post book? And longer story about how I exited corporate America after a lot of time and a lot of effort there and some success. But after the book, I was thinking I really have to do something with this. I have a window where you have your own intellectual property that maybe you can turn it into something. Maybe not. Maybe it has legs. Maybe it doesn't. But if you don't try, if you don't take advantage of that window, you may never have it again. You'll just be back on the treadmill, back on the rat wheel. So I decided to give it a try. And that took shape in People Leader Accelerator, which is the exec development program for HR people. And the book was, all those foundational principles that we try to teach. Now, maybe back to your question around like how has my upbringing shaped my involvement there. My girlfriend now for almost 2 years is a employment attorney, and she has offered multiple times to be a guest speaker for us. And I've never found like that perfect fit of the employment attorney. And I use a couple of different subject matter experts to talk about certain topics. It's not just me. There's this constellation
within People Leader Accelerator.
That's right. Yeah. And I keep turning her down. I keep trying to graciously say, like, thank you. You truly are an expert. But I really don't want to mix my personal relationship
interesting.
with my professional activities.
That's so funny. So my dad and his sister, my aunt, built Zander Associates, this environmental consulting firm. And at least from the outside, knowing them both but not being the owners of that business, really had a business relationship that was not contentious for 30 years in a way that is awe-inspiring to me. And so in some ways, I think I've never said this or even thought this before, but I'm not afraid of mixing business and personal in that way because I had that model of it going so pristinely well.
Wow.
Like unfathomably well. And I'm sure both of them who are actually the ones doing the work would disagree. But from the outside, they have a loving brother and sister relationship. They also had a 30-year working relationship. Now I've built things with people, friends and chosen family and lots of people in the past. But like I lost relationships when I built Robin's Cafe and then like hired my girlfriend to help run it. And then the relationship didn't work out large because the business took precedence. So I don't think that there's a certain right way. But that's really interesting that you're aware that you're like hesitant to involve your girlfriend because of maybe some of those family stories.
Yeah. I don't think it's a hard and bright line around do it and don't do it. And I don't think I'm the expert on whether or how to do that. But it's formative.
Yeah.
It's a formative experience. And boy, being a entrepreneur and small business owner, there's almost a need on a certain level to mix personal and professional. Like the professional is so personal.
Yeah.
As a small business owner and entrepreneur, and vice versa. You're spending so much of your time connecting with people, and you value those people, and you bring those people into different levels of partnership and interaction with you and your business. And I see how the blending is valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Neat. I did not realize that People Leader Accelerator was in some ways like a coming full circle for you. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So I want to shift to your 25-year career as a corporate professional and specifically as an HR professional, because you have so much depth of knowledge about the workings of HR, about the workings of the people function. How did you find your way, right? And I believe you started sort of in banking, into HR.
Yeah. So mid 90s. I was early 90s. I was a college student and trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I was a good student and had a bunch of AP credit and was trying to figure out the profession. LA law was on TV at the time, so I wanted to be a lawyer. That sounded really interesting and fast-paced and well-paying. So I decided I wanted to eventually go to law school. So I went to the best in-state university, and I did reasonably well. I did quite well. And the family business went through a big downturn. So this may be a longer story that we can clip it. Family business went through a big downturn. My parents
after high school,
after high school.
Yeah, so just continued to struggle.
It was years long thing, and bankruptcy is a 7+ year shadow over the family finances. So my parents were saying that we would have to drop out of school. They couldn't help support us. My sister and I, my younger sister and I. And so I was thinking about, well, what can I do? I had 3 part-time jobs at the time while I was in college. And I ended up deciding that I needed to graduate early. So I finished my undergraduate in 3 years. But by doing that, kind of unexpectedly, having not planned for it at the time, I missed the cutoff to take the LSAT, the law school admissions test. But I didn't miss the cutoff for the GRE, the graduate something entrance test. And so I was, okay, I'm taking this, but I don't know what I want to do. I just know that I need to be done with paid undergrad. It's time to move on to the professional career. And I ended up getting a full ride scholarship to the best human resources graduate school in the world, which happened to be at Illinois. And I just happened to take a cross-listed negotiations class in the summer, got applications in for a couple other places, a couple other good places, but Illinois called me up and offered me a full ride. So that's what started me down the path. It was that family financial experience kind of unexpectedly redirected me into the graduate degree that then ended up leading me down the path. And so I finished grad school and had a couple of internships along the way and went to work right out of school for Pepsi. Was in a couple of locations for them. Left Pepsi to be head of HR at a startup company back in 99 or 2000 during the dot-com boom and bust.
It's an interesting time to be at a startup.
Yeah, so I was a chief HR officer of a global company when I was 23, 24.
Interesting.
And then that company went bankrupt.
How big was that company before it went bankrupt?
I was hire number 20-something, and we got to 120, maybe.
Got it. Yeah, the 1999, 2001 era.
Yep. Laid myself off and everybody else. And then, I described it as a flight back to quality, where I went from Pepsi to startup to General Electric. And GE, it was a more industrial. It was part of GE Capital, but it was more of an industrial business, and then into banking. So, if we walked through the many stops over the 25 years, we'd be here all day. But I've been in a bunch of different industries, and it's been this ping-ponging between really large, really well recognized and credible, stable organizations, big jobs at big companies.
Yep. To
smaller, entrepreneurial, more standalone jobs, and something hasn't worked out at those repeatedly. And then I go back to the big company, and then I do the more entrepreneurial, and back and forth, and here I am today.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What are some of the differences between, whether that's GE, Pepsi, Wells Fargo, right? Between some of these big companies and some of the startups that you've been a part of? Like, where do they most differ in your roles in each?
In my roles in each?
Or what it feels like to work within them, the culture of each.
Yeah. At a large established company, you have this mass and you have this history, and there's infrastructure that, good or bad, has been built up over time. And so you're really trying to optimize for quality, usually. You can spend a little bit more money. You've got a lot more resources. Usually time is not a giant factor. Everybody works hard, but things move a lot slower in big companies. So you're focused on quality. In smaller organizations, you're building everything from the ground up, or even if there is a little bit of infrastructure, you're tearing it down and replacing it with something. So it's a build versus run, and it's a quality versus speed emphasis. because usually there's something on fire in the small company or something that needs to happen fast. And so I think I put this on my LinkedIn profile. I know what good looks like, and I know what fast feels like by having had a foot in both of those worlds.
Yeah, that's beautifully articulated. So flash forward 25 years in HR roles. I've been a part of conversations about things like distributed work and, even what is the future of work since 2014, very concretely, through, my conference, Responsive Conference, which I don't think actually you ever went to prior to 2020.
That's right.
I don't think we had just started to make contact in 2019. I don't think you ever came to Responsive, but you've been a part of those same conversations for 25 years and have seen the change in a much longer span than I have. I'm fascinated by what the modern role of HR and the people who are responsible for the individuals who make up an organization, right? Their role has changed so much. And now that is sort of what you are teaching, advising on through your consultancy Series B, and teaching through cohorts of students and people who buy the various courses and offerings from People Leader Accelerator.
Yep.
Very selfishly, I'm interested, right? And I've learned a ton from you already, but two domains that I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on. One is org design, the structure of an organization, the shape of an organization, especially in the modern world where that is so changing. And there's things around self-management. There's things around, Tony Hsieh, prior to his death, was a friend of mine. And Zappos, where he was CEO, very famously, did away with managers.
Right.
So
Holacracy.
Holacracy. And then also culture. What are the do's and don'ts of building a great organizational culture? And that question for me is, I've worked in so many different industries. I've tried to count every once in a while and get past 25, and I'm like, okay, I'm done. I can't count anymore. But I've had bosses throw plates at my head, and I've had a few great opportunities where I'm working with somebody who's more of a coach and a friend who just happens to be my director, my boss.
Yeah.
So when you look at, let's start with organizational design, organizational culture, whether that is some of the biggest organizations in the world or your own startup, what are your philosophies of how to structure an organization to succeed?
The answer to so many questions in this space is it depends. So that's a big struggle, right? It depends on your context, on your profit margins, on your maturity, on your resource level, on your cash burn, on the personalities of the key players in place. So what I try to talk about both in the book as well as in the courses and the mentoring programs I do are the frameworks by which to think about these things. So, boy, wouldn't it be great if we just had a playbook that we said, here are the
magic pill.
Right, here are the 5 things that that everybody should go do. But it depends. And what it largely depends on around org design is, what are you trying to accomplish? So think about it like a waterfall. And at the top of the rocks, where the water just starts to come off the ledge, is what is your organization trying to accomplish? And then the next layer down, or maybe this is an org chart flowing down. The next layer down is, who's going to be responsible for those things? Or what are the key activities that support those goals? And then who's going to be responsible for those things? So I think about org design in terms of allocation against those most important things. So it's like a supply and demand thing. And the demand is the goals and the supply is your team. And you want to have a structure that supports role and goal clarity, which means you know who's doing what. And the org chart helps you figure that out, so you don't have a bunch of people that are all kind of chaotically working on the same thing and hopefully collaboratively or by consensus getting to an answer. You want to have a clear decision maker or decision-making process and know that you have the right resources dedicated to the right problems.
Can you give me for instance, and if we want to, I'm happy to use Zander Media as an example.
Let's do it.
That's useful.
Let's do it. Yeah. So, all right, let's do a case study right here live.
Sure.
What are the short list of most important goals for Zander Media?
I mean, staying afloat, right? Like,
Okay.
we are not a venture-backed tech company with other people's money as our operating capital. So like, what we do in client work is actually what we use to pay our employees.
Yep.
So that's number one for
So
me.
you want to have some sort of financial understanding and control. Okay, so you may have a finance person. Maybe
Sure.
that's an outsourced finance person. Maybe that's a part-time finance person, but you probably want somebody watching the books.
Yeah, that's me and Star Fox. But like, I'd say that I am thinking about that every day. And Star Fox, as a bookkeeper who is also our sort of de facto head of operations, is thinking about that very, very regularly.
And maybe to a greater or lesser extent, somebody ensuring that the revenues keep coming in the door. So you may have a sales or BD or
Sure.
Yep, there you go also. Okay, so you're already wearing two hats. So there's a finance and there's a sales component involved in staying afloat. And so
Yep.
depending on the mass or the importance of those things, maybe those should be two different people with that being their primary goal,
Sure.
right? Primary goal is primary activity. And if you have a secondary goal, you generally never get to it.
Well, I would say equal importance, right? Bringing in new work is great, but if we're not able to deliver against that work, then we aren't a functional organization either. And so, right, being able to deliver exceptionally for the clients that we actually are serving is the thing that has gotten us to this point, certainly. And so that's where a majority of our headcount, a majority of our employees are spending time, is actually doing the work that we are delivering against for our clients.
Yep. So that's, call that an operations or execution group.
Right.
That-
And I divide that into three categories.
Yep.
Video being our primary offering, design and sort of brand being a secondary one, and then increasingly social media management being another.
Yep. Yep. So you may, as we think about org design, as you think about those verticals, you probably want to have somebody serve as a lead for each of those verticals. Maybe that's a full-time, maybe they're a player coach, maybe it's a full-time management job.
Tell me about the
Depends on
difference
scale.
between player coach and full-time management job. What is that distinction?
Yeah, especially at high growth companies, there tends to be a little bit of sneering at the idea of full-time management. Like, oh, no, we want somebody who does real work, not a manager. Well, if you're an effective manager and you have a sizable team or organization, being a good manager is a full-time job. One-on-ones with however many people you have, planning, following up to coach, educate, onboard, hiring, all the many activities that if you're a frontline manager, depends on the type of work that you're doing in terms of span of control, like a call center manager with some recruitment, onboarding, and training external help could manage a lot of people. Tony Hsieh at Zappos had, it's still a relatively flat organization with a lot of call centers would have a shift manager with 20 plus people that they're responsible for. But if you're a CEO, you don't want to have 20 direct reports, right? 4 to 6 in disparate roles might be a more comfortable span. So I'm not sure I fully answered your question, but the span depends. And management should be acknowledged as a significant piece of work that gets more complex given the disparate nature of the work that your people are doing.
Something I'm really fascinated about, particularly in startups, is self-management, right? It's really the reason that I started Responsive Conference originally. Is I'm not particularly good at being told to go do this thing, and then I perpetually go do that. Like, it makes me a bad employee, or at least it means that I have never stayed an employee somewhere particularly a long time. But also, I love working, let's just say, with you as PLA, being a Zander Media client at times, because you are so in the weeds. We'll build a website for you, and 3 days later, you've gone in and tweaked copy and made adjustments and made changes there. I love working with people who are taking their own initiative within the container or around the edges of the thing that we are working on together, not somebody who just wants to be told, here is the playbook, go and execute the playbook. I'm terrible at writing that playbook, so that just doesn't actually work for me as a teaching. I'm a good teacher, but I'm not good at giving all of the steps and then somebody else goes and executes them. And so is there a right answer, or is this one of those it depends situations around the balance of self-management and how much authority to grant to other people within an organization, whether that's Zander Media or a startup of your previous experience?
Yeah, the answer is it depends. But to try to be helpful, I'll try to frame up what does it depend on. So in part it depends on the work that needs to be done. So let's start back with that supply and demand waterfall of how much work and how critical is it to do that work. And if it's relatively routine, task-oriented work, then you can have some workers, some employees that do that. If it's creative, complex, professional, skilled, or even expert level work, then you're dealing with a different type of worker. And management of those different types of workers, I think a lot of us, myself included, uses management or leadership as kind of a shortcut word, where there are actually some different types of support. It could be supervision, which is more directly being in the weeds, looking over somebody's shoulder and maybe doing it with them. There's management, which is more clearly identifying the tasks to be done and following up with people. Leadership, which is a bit more goal and role structure oriented, and then the people will go deliver on that vision that you're setting. And then executive leadership, can blur a little bit, but so there's slightly different flavors of ice cream on that. And so I would suggest it depends in part on the work that there is to be done, is how much you can delegate, how much you can expect someone to self-manage as well.
Interesting. We're in a world today, and I mean, this has probably always been true, but I look at building a business that is made up of people doing, in my case, very creative, very demanding work in 2022. And it's so, the news cycle is so fast and so fraught. Attentions societally are so high in the US and I think globally. What advice would you give a CEO of Zander Media is a 10-person company at this point, but there are so many startups out there that are struggling with when do I post something publicly? Am I going to get in trouble for something that I share, right? How do we build a culture of assuming good intent? What advice would you give me or anybody about building an organization with, I am allergic to working in a culture that you walk into a building, you walk into a room and it's bad, it's toxic, you feel it. I'm so sensitive to that. And I always have been. That's part of my upbringing. What advice would you give me for building for culture?
First, congratulations on getting to a team of 10. Second, I'm observing just my own physical reaction to the topic. I just about hug myself as you talk about this environment that we're in, and it is fraught. It is tough to deal with the perceptions and issues and shaming and blaming that goes on, and how much of it exists in your workplace. And how it's handled, I think is a decision that you want to directly and intentionally address. So once again, it depends. So you'll have, as the business owner and business founder, your own frame of here's how I want to operate, here's how I see the world. And maybe certain people are at different points on the social and political spectrum of how involved they think they should be. There's also, where does your business stand in that world as well? If you're a gun manufacturer, you're probably doing different things than if you're an educator. Terrible analogy. Hope you clip that. Terrible. So I would, the framing there is be intentional about how you want to show up externally and internally. Don't just let it happen. If you just let it happen, you're reactive, things will very quickly leave your hands. And it's debatable whether they're ever really in your control. But if you can make some foundational decisions about here's how I think we should interact with the world, and think it through when you're not in the heat of the moment of whatever the topic is that happens to be facing the world or your community, you'll likely be in a better position to make a thoughtful decision.
The single biggest learnings, so the two substantial businesses I've run in the last 5 years, maybe three if you count Responsive Conference, which we paused in 2020, but Robin's Cafe, right? With no experience, built a cafe. And there were so many moments in learning to run a restaurant with no experience that I had to level up emotionally. A story I don't think I've ever shared publicly. The single hardest permit to get in building a restaurant in San Francisco for me at the time, this was 2016, was not our ABC permit, our alcoholic beverage control, which you would expect, right? Getting a liquor license would be difficult. And it was, but actually it was getting outdoor tables and chairs permitted. We had to go between the number of maybe 5 different departments in San Francisco. Each one had separate offices, bring the permit from one place to the next. At the time, I was dating an attorney, and I could not possibly have gotten that done to get literally a place for our customers to sit outside of the cafe without her helping me go through the bureaucracy and navigate the bureaucracy of that process. Speaking of mixing personal and professional. And that was not how I was expecting to spend my time. I was expecting this, like, I'm going to learn how to put together beautiful menus for our customers. And instead I was stacks of paperwork and the bureaucracy of it. And at times, like, that was one of those relationships that ended as a result of that, right? Like, the emotional struggle of that was substantial. And it was, 2 years later when, I don't know, an employee, thinking of a specific employee, no called, no showed and quit. I had gone through that struggle. I had grown through that struggle initially. I had come to a renewed sense of self as it related to that business. And so that when there was at the time it felt like could have been a catastrophe of a no call, no show or whatever, able to handle that tension much more solidly. And that's what I've been finding at Zander Media these days too, where something that would have 2 years ago, don't mind the dog barking or sneezing, put me into a tailspin for days or even, months, is now just like, that happened. This is why. This is what we're going to do about it. And here's the next step forward. That emotional calm and solidity is the only thing that allows me to do my day-to-day work today at Zander Media. And that has been a development over time. And I often, growing up, would describe myself as like a spider in the middle of the web where any little emotional impact pings the web and I am just thrown around. Yeah. I've always been very sensitive to other people's emotions, often for worse, not for better. And so it has been developing the skill of being resilient to that or being aware, but not negatively impacted. That has been perhaps my biggest learning in business over the last 5 or 7 years. I'm curious how you've seen founders or now as a founder yourself, how you've developed that or how you've seen people cultivate the skills of calmly making decisions in the face of crisis.
Well, in my role for 20-something years in corporate human resources role, you're involved in so much, but rarely are you the final decision maker. So you're an advisor, you're an expert, you're sometimes a pair of hands that delivers somebody else's decision. And so there's a certain level of professional detachment that, for better or worse, comes with that. Where this is happening, we need to address it. Here are the 3-5 different ways that we can. Likely, we're going to encounter some hurdles. I've seen this movie one way or another before, and so part of that just comes with the school of hard knocks. Part of that comes with the professional role that you take on over time. And I think for a business owner or entrepreneur, that's something that you learn often through the school of hard knocks as well, is you'll have those blips and you'll have those challenges, and you can get really caught sideways by it, or you can choose to move on. And back to our earlier line of discussion. There's so many entrepreneurs and founders that blend the personal and the professional. And a lot of those professional challenges often end up having personal implications and vice versa. And so that's just really difficult. And just acknowledging that that's really difficult, and as much as possible, entering any situation, whether it's a personal or professional partnership, with your eyes wide open, helps you, I think, to navigate choppy waters on the back end of anything that could happen. So awareness is big. You don't want to plan for the worst, but you want to, be cognizant of what your situation is. Meaning, let me be more specific. If you enter some sort of deep professional relationship that has a personal component to it, there might be a higher level of precariousness to both. So be aware of it, and maybe you can do some things to improve the likelihood of success along the way. But if you just ignore it and move forward, then there's no safety net waiting for you, or that safety net's less likely to actually save you.
So you're the father of two.
Little girls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How old?
Almost 7 and almost 9.
And you grew up in a business that tanked when you were in high school.
Yep.
And you're, a founder yourself, building businesses yourself these days. What do you want to model to your girls about business, about organizations, about companies, about entrepreneurship? Either that was modeled or wasn't modeled for you as a kid, or from your learnings in all the years?
Wow. At the age where they're at, they're still beginning readers. So I feel like there's probably some professional aspects I'm giving off, but that'll heighten over the next few years. This is one of those areas that I probably haven't thought about enough. Really. Like,
Yeah.
What do I want them to take away?
Yeah.
From my family, I really took away a strong work ethic, maybe too strong, like overly strong, 7 day a week, 24/7 sort of strong. And so I have that in me. I don't think I'm taking that as far as my parents did. But I very much want my girls to, see the value of good, hard work, of being focused on delivering, keeping your promises. That's super important to me. If you say you're going to do something, you absolutely do it, whether that's a deadline or a commitment or whatever it is.
One of the principles, so I don't know if you've read my book, Responsive, What It Takes to Create a Thriving Organization, which was really a series of interviews that I did over a course of years with speakers and sort of thought leaders in the self-management ecosystem. But one of the principles that I took away from that is, and this is Doug Kirkpatrick, who's a writer in the space, don't use force and keep your commitments. And this was a tomato manufacturing plant based actually in California that has been entirely self-managed for years. And those were the only two guiding principles of an organization that was very successful, remains still. But don't use force and keep your commitments. And I've just always been haunted in a usually a positive way by those two guiding lights. Keep going.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
You were saying for your daughters.
Well, I think work ethic and keeping your promises, keeping your commitments. Those are two big ones.
Yeah.
And I don't know what else I would add to that. I very much want my little girls to be smart, sweet, successful, happy in their way. Happiness can be defined a bunch of different ways. But I'd love for them to be able to make some choices and experience life. And so, boy, I hope that the businesses, it's now 3. I now have 3 businesses. I haven't really talked to you about the third, the most recent one, a software product. A little bit we have. But it's my hope that that will provide the stability and the security to give them a great foundation for their childhood.
Yeah. I will say the modeling, right? You and I both growing up in family businesses. For me, it was the model of my father's work ethic was very much a part of it. It was the model of this is a thing that he is dedicated to and spending time on. And then the little ways that when I asked to be involved or when, I was forced to be involved, whether I was wanted to be or not, it was an open door to me. It was, I could go into my dad's office. I could see his workplace. I wasn't necessarily, welcome to work there, but I could see that he was spending time and that then it mattered to my family. And there's so many memories I have. This is fun. I don't usually reflect on it, but of walking into his office in Novato, seeing, the big wooden table that was their conference room table, and knowing that he was doing that for us. So I want to talk about your businesses today. Let's start with Series B Consulting, which is your consultancy. What is Series B? And then also what is People Leader Accelerator? And I don't even know if the software business has a name yet, but we can talk about that as well.
OTP, On Track Performance.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Series B is me. Series B is my single shingle that I use as an umbrella for all the various things that I'm doing. And I have a couple of plates spinning, but at least they're all related. They all have the same China pattern, those plates. So Series B, I have a cornerstone client, which is a private equity company based in Palo Alto. I do work across their portfolio of 25 or 30 companies. They come and go. And that is some of the most fun HR work that I've ever been able to do. I operate inside but still outside the system, where I work for the investor rather than the CEO of those individual companies. And so I can give advice, I can make suggestions. There isn't sort of the overhang of, what if my boss, the CEO, doesn't like that? And I'm able to put my professional expertise to play. And so really love that. In the HR world, that's called OD and OE, organizational development, organizational effectiveness work. I'll do 360s for CEOs. I'll do leadership effectiveness work within a leadership team at companies large and small, and a bunch of other stuff. But thank goodness for this wonderful cornerstone client, which is a great group of people. I'm really proud to be working with them. And I have a series of one-on-one mentoring and coaching relationships, usually with HR leaders, that I also do under Series B, and a handful of projects that pop up now and again. So that's Series B. People Leader Accelerator is what we've worked on together the most, and that's this executive education program. Actually, maybe a little broader. Maybe it's professional development program for HR people like me. So I did that my whole career. I wrote a book that was intended to help HR people in this niche of high growth companies, and first started the Accelerator, which is like this executive MBA type program, 16 weeks, really intensive, tiny cohort, lots of faculty and expert interaction. Have just been so privileged to meet some wonderful people through that, and to have received such great feedback from the people that have gone through it, and started expanding that over the past 6 to 8 months, which your team has helped with. So instead of the tiny cohort of 10 people twice a year that go through it, now we're creating workbooks and potentially videos and some short form, couple hours at a time, live classes. And so the idea is I want to help more people. I call what I do in that space HR for HR. I want to help other HR professionals be more successful. And so that means touching them more. Like, who's actually going to read the 200-page book? But maybe they'll attend a 3-hour class, or maybe they'll download a workbook, and maybe that'll help them. So that's PLA, People Leader Accelerator. And then most recently, I've started a software venture. So we're here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I do a lot of consulting and advising with HR tech companies or tech companies that are building tools to support the HR function and sell them to employers. And I've seen some good ideas and I've seen a lot of not very good ideas. And I've been doing this work for a long time, and there are a couple areas that I think haven't really been solved for. And so I decided to take a crack at it myself. Instead of these like fresh college grads dropping out of Stanford to build something in a field that they don't actually know something about, or financial capitalists building something that kind of know the ropes, like how about we build something for ourselves? So anyway, OTP, on-track performance, is intended to be the most simple, the most easy to use, and most useful performance management tool for small and mid-sized companies. Instead of like some big annual performance review, it's a quick check-in. Like, do you need help? Have you had a one-on-one with your manager? Ask a couple of basic questions and have somebody be able to get that feedback back and do something with it.
Cool.
Yeah, let's make it easier.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm working with a Ukrainian-based software development team. Actually, most of them are in Poland and Italy right now. But boy, that's been a particularly interesting experience as I've worked with them for the past 6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in the years that I've been tangential to the HR ecosystem, never having been a head of HR myself, but sort of seeing the world evolve, I've seen so much burnout and so many good people trying to execute change within their organizations. And I know that a lot of the resources that you and, obviously I've had a little bit of a role in People Leader Accelerator, the impact of these courses that you've put together have really changed the trajectory of attendees who I've gotten to see, whether that's through growth within their organization or finding a better fit within another organization. Yeah, I've learned a lot from you personally as well. You're somebody that I turn to when I'm trying to figure out what my next step is or a change that I want to make in organizational culture. I'm grateful for that and for our personal and professional collaboration.
Well, likewise. Thank you. For
folks listening and watching, where can they go to learn more about you, PLA, on-track performance, and Series B?
It's a lot. Hey, I would just encourage anybody that's listening in to connect with me on LinkedIn, Andrew Bartlow. All of that, all of those many ventures are captured on my LinkedIn profile. People Leader Accelerator is really my passion project. So be sure to check that out if you're in the HR space. And hopefully we can help you be more successful and be less likely to burn out.
Awesome. So peopleleaderaccelerator.com is one of the URLs, and also Scaling for Success, People Priorities for High Growth Organizations. Andrew, thank you so much for sitting down today. It's really a pleasure.
Thanks, Robin.